we invited all area legislators to come and join us, but he declined and Kim Norton just did not respond. However, we have a number of others who are in attendance tonight. I'd like you to come on up when I say your name. Representative Steve Drazkowski. David Sinders. Representative Mike Benson. Senator Carla Nelson. Representative Dwayne Quantum. Welcome. We're delighted that you've come here to join us tonight. We hope you'll have a chance to get your points across. We're going to try and do this a little differently. A year ago when we did this, what happened was the first ones that got to speak got all the juicy stuff, and by the time the one that got to the far end of the table, there was nothing left. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a minute and a half. They each have a pick on one topic that they're going to discuss. And we will start this off with Representative Drazkowski here on his favorite topic. We'll do a minute and a half on that. The second round will be 3.5 minutes, and then it's anything goes. Any topic goes after that. So, and then lastly, we will be taking questions, but not statements. We will be taking questions from the audience afterwards. Okay, with that, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks everybody for coming tonight and helping us look forward to the future to create actually a freer Minnesota. I think we've got a good example of where we don't need to go, and it will help us understand better what we need to do as we go into that type of a direction. One of the areas that I would like to talk about is the bonding bill. Most Minnesotans, I think, don't understand that bonding means we are borrowing money with the state government, we are spending it on things throughout the state, and then the state taxpayers get to pay that money back with taxes. Debt service on our $6.3 billion of bonded debt in the state of Minnesota is at $1.3 billion out of the general operating fund. Each biennium, it's the fastest growing part of the general operating fund is debt service. We added another approaching $1.5 billion over the biennium this year. The latest bonding bill, actually it was two bills. It was $850 million in borrowing, and then some of the surplus that was here. Is that you were done already?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. We had too many projects like civic centers for cities who are losing money. They're going to compete against each other. Palace theaters, cherries on the spoon, snowmaking facilities. Instead, we need to move to the future to a situation that we'll use it for roads and bridges, wastewater and public infrastructure, and fix our deteriorating buildings. We can do it, but we need to have leadership in the legislature to have that happen. Thank you.
I should have mentioned before we started this, thank you, Steve. Round of applause for Steve on that. I should have mentioned before.
And we've all, by the way, shared topics, and the good ones are all used up. So I'm gonna just touch on some small ones, but actually, I think it's symptomatic of what we've gone through the last couple of years, and it's the freedom bills, if you will. Those lost freedoms, which either we had lost or did lose last legislative session. First one I want to talk about, it's got a little play locally, maybe even around the state, is this thing called a sprinkler bill. Doesn't sound like much at all, but requiring every house in Minnesota, every new house, to have fire sprinkler systems in there if they're over 4,500 square feet, with the intent to bring that on down incrementally to smaller houses as we go forward. It's only going to put a deep chill on housing starts in Minnesota. Housing starts are an index of prosperity and economic growth. We just can't let that happen. The other little thing, this goes actually to a local city council member who you may note as I speak. Something as simple as a state ban on covenants that involve rooftop solar. In other words, this legislature this year passed a bill that said, we don't care what you think of the neighborhood. We don't care about your covenants. If you want rooftop solar, you can have it. The last one I just want to talk about is simple as it sounds. Is that red?
Yep.
Okay.
You can tell a minute and a half's not a long time. And I somehow decided to pick the budget, and there's just no way in a minute and a half I'm going to get the budget done. So Good, good. All right, we'll share it then. So she'll fill in the details. I have to start this by saying, you know, I've always felt at home here, always felt at home. But not running this next year, I don't feel like any pressure at all. So you ask me anything you want, as tough as you want. Well, we'll start with a little history. When we took office in a majority in the House and the Senate 4 years ago, we had a $6 billion deficit. And we decided not to raise your taxes and to craft a budget that would make us live within our means. And we crafted one that was slightly more than the biennium before, but it was $35 billion. The Democrats took control, and you know what they did. You know, it'll be history, and we'll fill in some more of the details. But in fact, they raised your taxes by $2.4 billion. Now, they had a projected surplus of $1.2 billion, so the actual revenue stream is more like $3.6 billion in new taxes on Minnesotans. That's a lot of money, folks. And if that's not bad enough, and we've already seen how the results of that is beginning to drive business out of the state and making more businesses deciding they're not going to come to Minnesota. But we have a budget crafted, and in just one instance, a bill that was just passed in the waning hours. It's another additional spending bill, omnibus spending bill of $2.6 million, or $260 million, that will have tails of 800. So we saw all funds budget go to $70 billion, $9 billion more than we spent one biennium ago.
Thank you. Well, it is great to be here. So I'll chat with you later about some other things, but let's just get to those numbers right away. Here's the facts that you want to know. The Democrats are saying there is a surplus, right? $1.2 billion surplus. Well, you're not naive. You know that last year they increased taxes by over $2 billion. All right? Now, the budget that has been passed in the last 2 years, or the last year and this supplemental budget year, $6 billion increase in state spending. So hang on to that. $6 billion of new state spending. That's a 12% increase in our state budget. Now, all of this is at a time when our GDP is at 1.9%. And so you can tell that is unsustainable. And to make matters worse, the Democrats that are in control pushed that additional spending this year, another $1.2 billion of a supplemental budget in a non-budget year this year, in spite of the fact that we have had 3 consecutive months where Minnesota Management and Budget has received less revenues than expected. In fact, our GDP was at 0.9%. Not 1.9, which is pretty pathetic in and of itself, that it's that low. And I think it's because the tax policies from the DFL majorities of last year have taken effect, as has the overregulation. So we're seeing the handwriting on the wall.
Well, 2 years of scary. What made it through was bad. What we were able to keep from making it through with your help was very much scarier. And it was run away. There was no check and balance. There were no adults that had a voice or a power in the room. And they just ignored what Minnesotans wanted. It was pretty obvious that Minnesotans realized it. They weren't asleep. And that's why they go, oh, we're going to cut taxes. No, they got caught adding business-to-business taxes that nobody wanted, and they were forced to take them back. And that's what the tax cut was. It was undoing part of the harm that they've done. And there's not enough time to go over all the harm, but just the only good thing is it wasn't as scary as it could have been. And I think I'm under time.
Okay. Hey, now let's pass that microphone back down here, and we'll start over with Steve again. Pass it back down. And this time you can go to whatever topics you think best. 3.5 minutes.
Okay, some of the other things, a trend I think that we saw throughout, I don't have all the bills in front of me, but Mike Benson and I sit next to each other on the House floor, and it was very clear, as we're very aware of many of the labor issues, we both had served on the subcommittee on employee relations when we were in control in 11 and 12. We saw bill after bill after bill come forward. Representative Quam sits right next to us too, so we had a lot of discussions, but more and more bills about union payback, paying back the unions for the efforts that they put forward and all the funding that they brought to bring the Democrats in the majority in the House and the Senate last election. Millions of dollars, $3 million I think, at least from unions, and some put it as high as $8 million depending on how you measure that. But they came with bills, not only this PEEP bill, Public Employee Insurance Program, which is a government-run education, healthcare program run by the Office of Management and Budget that puts that government-run program into the first position on the queue of which insurance options, health insurance options, that school boards now, according to law, shall consider in the process. The unions then locally are put in a position where they almost have now a leg up on the administration, the school board, in that process of determining which type of health care program they will have, and taking that away from not only the school boards, but in essence the people and the parents in that district. So a first step really to, I think, to the unions going to a Wisconsin type style, the same style that was skimming in Wisconsin from a union-run health insurance policy that Governor Walker got rid of. So that's one example. The second example was again another school one, a small bill that came forward that essentially provided unionization of audiologists, music therapists, and I'm trying to remember one other type of therapist in a school. We don't have any of those around here, I don't think. But there's 70 of these people in Minnesota, okay? Now just to realize, so it passed, of course, and signed into law, so now those are also going to be unionized. 70 times $800 for every person for union dues, that's $56,000 a year to the union. Just from that one small bill, across a biennium, $112,000, that will win them another House seat. Those types of bills came over and over and over throughout the session. And I might be under time, Senator Sanju.
Good. I just wanted to reflect a little bit. I've been in, I think, 13 or so years now. The last 2 years, I would describe as a nightmare from the standpoint of the legislature, and a nightmare for, I think, those of us that participated in it, and frankly, a nightmare for the citizens of Minnesota. But as I think back, you can like Tim Pawlenty or not, but Tim Pawlenty was always in the goal for us. When they had both chambers, we had a goaltender, and that was Tim Pawlenty, and he kept most of the bad stuff out. This year we didn't have a goaltender. It was wide open, the floodgates are open, let it go, and of course we all come to see that. And as we moved into the 2013 legislative session, I can tell you Bill Queasley started talking about doo-doo. I mean, we moved into an office building where there was doo-doo and literally in the files left for us. There were funny kinds of notes. There were salary cuts for our staff, deep cuts for our staff in terms of staffing ratios. I mean, we were absolutely bare bones and below. They were filling up the whole Capitol with staff. I'm not sure how many they had, but maybe double the amount of staff that we had. And that's the way they use their power, totally indiscriminately, totally unfairly. Yeah, we lost the election, we lost those chambers. In the process, we lost a lot more. I think we lost, as a citizenry, to the point of $2.3 billion worth of new taxes. And then, by the way, as this year kind of unfolded, they give us back maybe 25% of that. You give me 20, I'll give you 5, and we're all happy. That's kind of what we're supposed to think. And it's just dead wrong. And then beyond that, during the course of the last 2 years, and you can disagree or agree on any of these, but whether it was gay marriage, the anti-bullying bill, the Venture program, if that's what we dare call it, things like PEEP, as the Representative Strauss talked about, pension giveaways. We don't talk about pensions much, but a lot of certainly giveaways in those areas. Taking the rigor out of education, getting rid of the testing, getting rid of teacher credibility from the standpoint of their skill set before they go into the classroom. We'd set it at a fairly high bar. Well, maybe not even high, but at a bar at least. They took that bar away. All these kind of things. Daycare unionization, I could go on and on. they unraveled a lot of things. In addition to that, they added a lot of things, most namely taxes and spending. So as we think about, at least I think about the last 2 years, it is indeed, has been a nightmare. I can only hope, as a Republican at least, that we certainly capture that House of Representatives, and that we have a new person sitting in the corner office, somebody that's got some sense in their head and some prospects, I think, for the good and welfare of Minnesota, because right now, we don't have that person in our states, and frankly, a runaway kind of train wreck going down the road. It is not sustainable. It can't last. So, Representative Benson, have at it.
I want to touch on a few things that Senator St. John just spoke briefly about, and pensions. When we were in the majority, I actually took a Democrat suggestion, Representative Kahn from Minneapolis, that pensions were so important in the state of Minnesota, and we were at such a deficit level, it was important that we put more people on the pension committee. So we took that bill, we passed it, and we added more people to the pension committee, while at the same time then, they won the election into power. Whereas in the past, whoever was in the majority party had a slight majority on this committee. When they structured the committee, when they took power, it's a committee of 14 people, they had 10 Democrats and 4 Republicans. Evenly split, 7 and 7, with the House and the Senate. And there were 2 Republicans from the Senate, 2 Republicans from the House, and that's it. And they jammed through the pension, more and more union bailouts, essentially. We started and you know, all you got to do if you have any, you watch any Fox News at all, any of the finance channels at all, you know that the market's doing rather well. So if you're investing it correctly, we should be making some money again. We should be at least beginning to get out of the problems we had from the Great Recession, if you will. But we went from $16 billion in the hole, unfunded liability with Minnesota pensions, to $17 billion. And they crafted new legislation this year through the Pension Commission we would begin to bail out the public employee pensions. A large part of that, I'm just going to tell you about one, was the Duluth Teachers Fund. We did 2. We did St. Paul and Duluth. And in Duluth, what we did is we combined the Duluth Teachers Fund with the TRA, the Teachers Retirement Association Fund. But in order to make that merger happen, you have to understand that the Duluth Teachers Fund is only about 50% funded. Only about 50% funded. They actually have 1.5 times more employees getting retirement than they have actual teachers paying into the fund. You know it all, that's not sustainable, right? But we passed the bill this year, not Republicans, but the Democrats, that would pay in out of taxpayers' dollars, not affiliated with the Duluth school system whatsoever, $14 million more every year for the next 28 years. Well, I stood up on the House floor and said what a problem I had with that. First of all, is that we didn't really change the system. We're still going to have the same problem, and it's the difference between going to a defined benefit, from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. But right now, in the Duluth Teachers Fund, they pay out $100 million a year, and they only pay in $50 million a year. So 14 is not going to make up the difference. So, given this situation, it's really not going to get cured, and they're going to continue to come back after the taxpayers of Minnesota to bail out these public employee pension funds. You know, even when I would make suggestions in the commission hearings that, you know, think of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Michigan, they're still going through their litigation to bail it out. Stockton, California, all these communities that essentially went belly up because of the pension plans. And so I'm about out of time, and I just wanted to get to one subject and talk about it a little bit, but ask me about transportation, because we're not done. Move Minnesota, we'll be back. I'm worried that they might even try to call a special session if we beat them up and take both of those back, because they want billions. They had a plan to add $700 million in new taxes every year, $1.2 billion per biennium for additional transportation.
Well, I'm going to talk a minute about a couple things. Troubling trends. I see troubling trends at your state capitol. First, there's the bad policy, and we've talked about some of that tonight. Minshore, you know, that was a horrible rollout But you know, bad policy does lead to bad implementation. That should not be a surprise to anyone. And the Republicans, we were at the table, and we did provide alternatives and amendments that would have made the federally mandated Obamacare somewhat more tolerable in Minnesota. But we were ignored, our amendments were shut out, and so what we got was the MNsure as the majority parties destined it to be. Here's a few facts on that. 240,000 Minnesotans lost their insurance. They already had health insurance, but they lost their insurance. Of the amount who have purchased insurance through the exchange, only 25% of them are from the private market. In other words, 75% of the MNsure enrollees already had government subsidized insurance, as they do now. This cost us $160 million just for the website. The OLA did an in-depth analysis of MNsure and said it was running from crisis to crisis. There was no leadership, and should we start over? There will be a further in-depth OLA report looking at that. Do we need to start over? That's a hard pill to swallow. We already spent $160 million, but it's not working. The other thing I want you to know is that because the mix is so bad between the young invincibles, the cheap people to insure who have lower health care costs, and those of us who are older who have higher health care costs, the mixture in MNsure and Obamacare across the nation has turned on its head. There are not enough of those young invincibles. And so now it's a fact that they've already, in Minnesota, had to raise the tax on MNsure, double it, because, well, to make up for the high cost of premiums. But here's what you should know. The premiums for next year are not going to be released until after the election. After the election. Normally, you know, the enrollment period starts on October 1st. That would have been quite damaging because we all know that those premiums are skyrocketing because of the bad rollout, the bad policy, the bad implementation, and they got the risk mix upside down. That's just one bad trend. Mike mentioned the pension, $17 million every year to bail out St. Paul, $7 million every year to bail out the Duluth teachers. We can't do that. Let's talk a little bit about the process. We could go on and on about the bad policy. The process, I think democracy, as you and I, as our founders envisioned it, is on the wane when we have the one-party control. We saw the Senate office building stuck in the middle of a tax bill with no hearings and shoved through in the middle of the night. Now, of course, nobody wants to claim that. Now they're not calling it the Senate office building, the SOB. Now, then they called it the law, the legislative office building. All the senators are trying to run from it. Now all the legislators are trying to run from it, and they're calling it the COB, the Capitol Office building. The fact is, we should be running away from that. It's a not needed building. It was stuck in the middle of the night without public input. And that's one example of bad process. Another one has to do with Sunday growlers. We passed that on the Senate floor. Oh, I have more to talk about, but I've seen that red flag. So I'll tell you about Sunday growlers, PSEO, staff cuts, and silencing the minority, and omnibus bill fever at the Capitol. We might have to talk about that later.
They covered a lot of stuff. There was an extra $140 million that was spent on bringing up, other than the website. Everybody saw those wonderful Paul Bunyan ads that made so much sense, right? And you look at, we had about 9% that were not insured. 75% of those could have been either, they had access either to employer or government programs. So between 7 and 8% of those 9%, they had access to insurance but decided they didn't want to go through the expense or for whatever reason. And so there wasn't much of a issue that we sort of ruined everything on. The bonding bill, 4% of that bonding bill was for local roads and bridges. About the size of the money that was put towards the Mayo Civic Center. That's all of that entire bill that was put towards local roads and bridges. One of those bridges
is in the city limits of Rochester. And frankly, we saw what happens when we don't take care of bridges. Now, we won't have the dramatic thing that happened in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but we could have one of us, neighbors or us, driving on one of those bridges when it fails. But that's not a priority. The Nicollet Mall, redoing that, adding stuff for the sculpture gardens. The Minneapolis and St. Paul arts, different projects, transit, and then some state trails was 10% of that bonding. 10%, local roads and bridges 4%. That's where the priorities are, and that's the problem. Every single bill, the priorities are not where they should be. We tried, all of us, amendments, we tried bills, etc., to fix things. And they would swat them aside, and they could ignore us. They couldn't ignore you, and again, thank you for helping get rid of those taxes that they discovered that, well, how the governor put it at Farm Fest? Oh, I didn't know they were in there. Well, you got three groups that negotiated what was in it. The leadership of the House, leadership of the Senate, and the governor and his crew. All from the same party. And you can't tell me that they did not negotiate. The guy was really quick in seeing that the sprinkler ban was in one of the bills and said, I'll veto it. If you get rid of the that sprinkler, taking it out so you're not forced to put that in. There are a lot of little things that we tried, and they were really good at finding those, but they couldn't find any of the big, major, glaring mistakes, like huge potholes in front of them. And that's what's disgusting about that one party leadership of everything.
All right, thank you. Now, what we're going to do, let's have a round of applause. Thank you. What we're going to do at this point in our meeting, I'd like to give you a preview of what's coming. We're going to go into a series of questions that you may all care to ask of these folks from the audience. Please make sure that these are questions and not statements. We have some history where we have people that think this is the time to make a speech. No, it's a time to ask a question. So we'll move into that in just a moment. Then we'll complete the meeting. After the questions are done, we'll complete our meeting. Last winter, we had a Senate candidate session where all of the United States Senate candidates came and they were able to speak except for one, and that was Mike McFadden. He's not here yet, but we are expecting him. After the meeting ends, what we think we're going to do, we'll stop this, and then we'll give, when our meeting is done, we'll give Mr. McFadden 5 minutes to make a statement, and then you can ask questions of him as the United States Senate candidate. Haven't seen him yet. We'll see if he gets here before our meeting is over. He better. And with that, we're going to move forward and just go into the session here. We have our man in the audience is going to be Mr. Baker. If you've got a question for any of these fine folks, raise your hand.
All right, who's going to be first? Somebody asked Mr. Benson about transportation. Let's not be bashful.
I have one.
All right, Cindy.
I want to know, at the end of the session, I read something, and it was very brief, and I really didn't catch it, but something about that something passed through the judicial about campaign finance, about the limits on how much you could raise or something like that, and I wanted to know if you know about it.
Actually, this is what just happened 2 days ago. Campaign Finance Board, this is very interesting. First, I'll tell you what our current law says. It says that you can only, as a candidate, you can only take so many large donations. Now, in my case, as a Minnesota State Senator, donations between $500 and the maximum allowed, $1,000, that's called a large donation. And our campaign finance laws said that, well, you can only take such an amount of those. I forgot what it was, maybe $6,000 or $20,000, whatever it was. There was a certain amount of those large donations that you can take. Somebody filed a suit which said, you know, that is against our free speech rights. Why can't I give $1,000 to Senator Nelson, even though she might already be full of large donors, because my free speech is just as important as the people who lined up first to give her those big donations. And the courts agreed. And now there is an injunction stating that we can take as many large donations as we want. Still, $1,000 is the cap. But I can take as many $1,000 donations as people want to give me. And so I'm asking you all, get out your checkbooks. Nelson for Senate. But that is the gist of that. And actually, I do think that's an example of really Minnesota government gone awry. We have gone to the extent where government tries to overregulate to the point where it is infringing upon our constitutional rights. And this is just one example.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Okay, questions?
Thank all of you for being here. Appreciate you coming to talk to us tonight. My question is, what's the status of this rail line that's been proposed between Rochester and the cities?
I can tell you that there wasn't any money that was in the bonding bill to help with the next phase of the study. But it's still being pushed really hard. If you go to any of the county board meetings or whatever, they don't talk about it all the time, but I can tell you that as a legislative priority, it is number one. One of the number one priorities of the county board is to push the high-speed rail between Minneapolis and St. Paul. There was a report on television the other night about the folks that are in the decision-making trying to decide on where, in fact, it's going to come into Rochester. Is it coming downtown? Is it going to the airport? Vice versa, Minneapolis, St. Paul. But it's still being very pursued. They're still hoping there can be money secured from the federal government, but it's going to take money, matching money from the state in some way. And if the Democrats are in power, I don't have any doubt that some way, shape, or form, if it's not through bonding, it's some other way that they'll find a way to finance it.
Okay, we have a question over here. Emma.
This is a very clumsy question, and it's not. Hold it up. Okay, I'm being mouthed. This is not. It's going to be clumsy. Maybe you all can recognize it. So in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, maybe there was an article in there citing Minneapolis and the Met Council. I don't know if anybody else saw it, but apparently the Met Council originally was supposed to be related to pipes and that kind of stuff. And apparently it's expanded its capacity and ability to now virtually run the city. It's got if I remember that correctly, about 17 members, every one of which has now, by this time, been appointed by Dayton. And the idea, as I understand it, is that it's called TMP or something like that. The idea is that they are going to decide how many people of which ethnic background, of which economic status, etc., should be per unit area. I think there are 7 areas. And they're going to tell us who can live where, or at least how many of each can live there ultimately. Now, am I incorrect? I am.
You're not incorrect, and it's 7 counties. It's not just Minneapolis. So it's a 7-county area. They levy. They're unelected. Just as you said, they started out as something that was supposed to focus strictly on infrastructure. It was about helping the metro area grow in an organized fashion. Having the resources in the right place for roads and bridges and utilities, if you will, and water and so on. But it's expanded way, way beyond that. I guess we've heard a couple of times one-party rule. I tell you what, the only way to rectify the problems that we're in right now, seriously, we are in serious trouble. We're going to have more and more businesses decide they're going to move from. It won't be the miracle of Minnesota anymore. It'll be the reverse of that. We're the 47th worst place to be in as far as taxation. We need one-party rule, but it needs to be the other party, not the party that's in power right now. And we need people, even in that party, that understands fiscal responsibility and conservative fiscal principles and personal rights and responsibility to really make a significant change. That's why it's so important for organizations like you to call into question your public officials, the people who have been elected, and hold them accountable. And show up at the ballot box and do what you can. I made mention before, I'm there too, folks, but if you look at the age group of the folks in this room tonight, we need to be asking sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters to join in this effort, because we are robbing from their future. I've got mine. If I decided to roll over tomorrow, I've got mine. I could just go home and say the heck with it. That's coming in. But the fact is, we're in trouble. And this next election, we say that just about every time. But this last time we said it, and look what happened when it didn't come, when our worst nightmare came true, right?
Mike, one of the thing that I was interested in, but if you extrapolate that situation, everybody's, that's Minneapolis. But, I'm understanding and trying to understand about the DMC and all that, but will that concept start to invade down here as we create our new empire? That's a point of question.
Yeah, I will say yes. Definitely yes. This is an ideology that you're seeing happen. They also want to build bike lines that correspond with these light rail lines, and they want to have, pedestrian things that all work together, and, everybody's kumbaya. And housing patterns, and you talked about that. They want to engineer the deployment of where your house is going to be and say, guess what, here's where you live. But to Mike's point, I want to read for you. I was in St. Charles this afternoon, which is in my district, and I was walking Main Street and talking to folks, and I walked up to this one building. It's vacant. It says, "Thank you for your patronage. Borderline Pizza is sorry for the inconvenience. At this time, I am financially unable to continue operating, and I'm grateful to the City of St. Charles and all the residents who supported Borderline Pizza." So I don't know what the story is behind Borderline Pizza, but there's Borderline Pizzas in all of our communities, and this is indicative of what we're fighting. Do the resources stay with the people and their ability to persevere in order to move forward as individuals and work towards prosperity? Or do we work towards a government that continues to build more Met Councils? And what in the hell is the Olmsted County Board deciding that it's necessary to build a train line from here to the Twin Cities? What outcry is there from people in Minnesota saying we need this thing? I think it's up to the people of Olmsted County to hold their county board accountable and get their nose to the grindstone and say, you know what? This is the job we elected you to do in Olmsted County, not between here and Minneapolis.
I noticed some of this is a leader concept coming up that I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand it. These, they're going to find out all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we're going to grow such and such speed. Now how are we going to find housing? A little sneak article there about single person housing, and then you're going to hear something else about something else. Well, people have to be nice, quiet, neighborhood. Oh, I'll be quiet. I just want to know, how are they going to put affordable housing in the middle of all of us?
Here's a very good example. They have water districts, and they've got groups that are formed. They're not elected. They have some taxing, assessing authority, and they're to try and help with watershed, clean up rivers, etc. Okay, we can all say that that's something that probably is a decent thing to do. Well, it's been authorized for them to increase their debt level so they can buy up. And one of them is a cold storage thing that's been around for, I think, before my father and maybe around the time of my grandfather when he was born. It's been around a long time. So they bought a large section and only need like less than 10% of it in order to do some conditioning around a stream bed and some water. The rest of it, they then give over to entities to do planned housing. So how are they going to do that and force the housing? They're going to use any form and entity of government to grab land or zone or control, no matter what it's supposed to do, and then hand it off to the one that's doing the planning of what type of houses are. And it's amazing that the watershed grabs land along transit routes. And there are other areas they could grab, but no, this is where they're going. And they come up with very creative ways of using any part of government, especially ones that are not elected, which could be accountable to you, and giving them taxing and assessing authority and being able to condemn and take property and redefine what it's going to be used for. And it's, I don't want to use the word scheme. I don't want to use the word non-trend, it's not trend, it's hidden. And the bills, it's a little part of a bill. So you would never hear about it, and we rarely hear about it. We're not allowed to fix and change. In the House, you can't do an amendment except for the first 24 hours a bill gets put into a bucket to possibly go on the floor. We used to, in our history, be able to come up during debate, come up with an amendment to solve. And that's why you've got two sides debating, to get the best result out. No, that doesn't work now. They just say, you have to do it ahead of time. They know when they're going to throw it in. They game the system. And the only way that we can fix that is like you did with national popular vote, is the people spreading the word. Shine the light on the shenanigans that they're pulling and shame them in public. And maybe they'll turn around and fix something. But it's scary.
Okay, who's going to be next?
Hi. What did each one of you do to personally make sure that Rochester got its share of bonding bill money? Fair share.
The committee chair never approached me and asked what I wanted. I might not have pushed any of that. What I did do is someone asked a question about why is it the civic center different. Well, Mayo can bring in some stuff. So I tried to give information, but I did not ask just for that, because the bonding bill was broken to me with 4% for transportation.
Well, it didn't help at all. I'd have to be honest with you to say that I think bonding should be for state infrastructure. And I know there's some arguments to be made that some of it is, but the bonding bill's really turned into, in a lot of ways, a real pork bill. They know that it's going to take Republicans and Democrats, and it's going to take areas all over the state in order to fashion to get it done. But nobody asked me the question about transportation, and here's my worry. We've used the bonding bill for everything but, other than about $90 million, I think, in roads and bridges. But we used it for everything but. And there's a $1.4 billion transportation bill that was heard in committee, never made it past committee, Transportation Finance, simply because they knew when they added the $2.4 billion in new taxes that it would be political suicide if they added another 1.2. They're not going to go away. They're not going to go away, and they'll be back. Now, they wouldn't need to come back. And by the way, part of that bill was they're gonna increase the taxes on gasoline. They're not gonna do it in the traditional way. They're gonna add 5% at the wholesale with a floor, a threshold of no less than 10 cents additional per gallon. At the current rate, it would have been 12 cents additional taxes on it, but it could have went up. And then it was also indexed for inflation. So they're gonna add a boatload more in taxes. That was about half of the $700 million per year. The other half was new sales taxes on the 7-county metro area that we talked about earlier, and the Met Council. A full 0.5% sales tax that would be dedicated to, majority of it going to transit. These folks just don't get it. Transit at its best, even after we plowed billions of dollars into it, like this the new line that we got going in between Minneapolis and St. Paul. By the way, if you guys probably you don't read, unless you read the Star Tribune or some of the local papers up there, they just found out that the schedule for this new light rail, it will take, from Minneapolis to St. Paul, it will take 67 minutes. 67 minutes. And this was over $1.5 billion in investment. And it will be subsidized to the tune of, is it 70 cents on the dollar? 75? 56 to 81. So, depending on where you fall. But, so that ongoing operating cost with the subsidies that we're going to be there. So I can't take credit for helping, if you will, Rochester get any of their share. I was obstinate and said that I couldn't support it. I told my leadership when they began asking who they could count on to count for votes. They knew that I had several things if I was going to stick up for my community in there, and I said no, you don't have my vote. And when it came time to vote for the bonding bill, I did vote for it. So.
I will just add that the bonding process is the ugliest process at the legislature. It's nothing more than a race to political greed, to somehow prove that you bring back a pile of pork for your community regardless of the merits of what the project is. And I outlined some of those, and there's more in the bill. You'll be appalled at what exists in the bill. And if we are truly going to move forward, and we truly have a crisis around road and bridge construction in the state, that is the vehicle by which we can fund it without having to raise any more taxes. But it's going to require real leadership by all of us there and all of us that are there next time in order to do that. The idea that we should vote for something because it's in our community, I think, is the wrong idea. The idea should be, is this of statewide significance, and is this a priority for our state? And that's what this process became long before it became corrupted. I don't know exactly when the political corruption of the process happened. Probably, maybe it was the day after it was created. I don't know, long before any of us were there. But it's all about, the way that it works is it's all about the chairs of the particular committees in the respective houses gathering up in the House the 81 votes necessary in order to pass the bill, and everybody's got their little pet project. Many of them are shameful in light of the fact that we have actual real road and bridge and wastewater, and in southwest Minnesota, the need to actually move water through a pipeline into communities that don't have water. But we're talking about snowmaking facilities. We're talking about the cherry on the spoon in Minneapolis that's sinking. Let it sink. And let's build our roads. And that's where we need to head with leadership. So if we succumb to the notion that it's our job when we go there to advocate for something in our community just because it's our community, that is political greed, and that is the wrong reason to be there.
I'll clap even though I did vote for the bonding bill. With respect to local projects, Mayo Civic Center was probably going to be in there with or without me. You go down the list, the Minskew project at the Rochester Community Technical College was for $1 million. That was on the list, and so that was you don't move that probably. That if you're going to have a bill, it was going to be in it. The last one that I did advocate for was $500,000 to finish the cleanup, if you will, of Lake Sun Road. I think that's important. It's an opportunity for us. unless we at this time in our history do that, I don't think it will ever get cleaned up. And I think we have a chance to do that. I voted for the bill.
And I voted for the bonding bill as well. You know, I take a page out of Ronald Reagan's book, and that is someone that agrees with you. I think that he's used 90% of the time is a friend. And I feel that way. And well, I have to say, there are a lot of things in that bonding bill that I did not like. There were some that I did. And I will tell you, for one, the Capitol renovation. We have one of the most beautiful capitals in the nation, and yet it is falling apart. Literally, the marble was falling off the structure. And when you go to see our Capitol, you'll see it has been deteriorating over years and decades. And it is not responsible stewardship for Minnesota taxpayers to not take care of the state-owned assets that they have. So the largest parts of the bonding bill were for state-owned assets, much like the Minnesota Capitol. So I do believe that was extremely important. I did support an amendment to put more money into roads and bridges, but of course that failed. But let me just tell you, this is the process that was sweeping the Capitol, this bad process that I mentioned. And it has to do with omnibus fever. In other words, things were put into omnibus bills, and you know, the bills are this thick, and yet sometimes they're thrown on your desk, and you vote on it right there. Sometimes you don't even have, you don't even get it ahead of time. But what I want you to know is it's a cynical trick to put a lot of projects in one bill, and you get one vote. You can kind of understand maybe why in budgeting sometimes that might happen, but like the Women's Economic Security Act, those were all policy bills. Those all should have been individual votes. And yet games were played at your Capitol to package bills in ways that is hard to vote for it because there was some bad stuff in it. It was also hard to vote against it because there was some good stuff in it. And I think that's one of those troubling trends that I've seen more in these last 2 years is this omnibus fever, putting and packaging bills into big, big packages. Sometimes we call them Christmas trees. In other words, it's this bill and they just keep adding more and more and more stuff onto it. But I was glad to support the bonding bill. I thought it was in the best interest of Minnesotans. Mostly, it protects state assets. There are things in there that certainly I wasn't happy with, like the sculpture garden and a snowmaking machine and those type of things. But overall, I think it's our responsibility as taxpayers to maintain the state-owned assets that we have. The other thing I'd mention just in the process side of things, that bonding bill had already been agreed to before we even got there. The amount had been agreed to, $846 million. That's how much that bonding bill was going to be. That was before session even started. Somehow, somewhere, leaders in the Democrat Party and the governor had agreed it was going to be $846 million. I will tell you, there were efforts to break that promise. And I will tell you, your Republicans stood firm and said, we're not voting for the bonding bill if it's over that $846 million. You need to honor your word. You need to honor your process, your promise. So I just tell you, it's very difficult up there to be in the minority. We certainly would hope that we'll see change in November. I don't know that our state can stand very long to have this overreach that we saw in every aspect, including the bonding bill.
Wait, the question over here is, where would one go to see the content of the bonding bill? Can somebody answer that?
Yeah, it's online. Go to the Minnesota Senate and just look for bills. There's a little tab where you can look at bills. And then you can just put in the text that you want to see the bonding bill. Or you can search for it by author. You know, there's a drop down, and the author was Stump, S-T-U-M-P-F. And you will see there the bonding bill, and you go down to the very end, and you want to see the conference committee report. And that will give you the bonding bill. You'll probably get access to the spreadsheet that lists it all.
Okay, other questions?
Just to tag on there, if whoever that was, it's House File 2490, and if you just Google HF 2490 MN, it will take you right to it.
Can you repeat that?
HF 2490.
House File 2490, in other words, HF in the Google box, HF 2490, and then put MN on the end of it, and you'll get very close to that bill. Make sure it's the right year though. 14.
So speaking of the bonding bill, there was a lot of money in there for MnSCU projects, and in particular, University of Minnesota. And somewhere around a year ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that had said that the University of Minnesota was one of the most expensive and efficiently run schools in the nation. Why do we keep throwing money at them? Make them get more efficient. I've been to the website, which shows the salaries of the people in there, and there are hundreds of people who make more than $100,000 a year who work for the university.
President Taylor makes $600,000 a year. There's going to be more to be said about that. When I was on higher education committee when we were in charge in 11 and 12, and we took out $100 million out of both of them and made it harder for them to raise tuition and put more money into grants for students. The Democrats came along just 2 years later, and they put $250 million back in. $250 million back in. If you remember that Wall Street Journal report, in fact, they're talking about administrative costs being a preponderance of the reason why tuition had went up. Actually, the Goldwater Institute released a study, a 15-year study in 2010. You can look this up. It's in August 12th, I think, 2010. And it showed the top 100 universities in the United States, of which University of Minnesota is prominent in there, and tied it directly to, you can look at the charts on there, ties it directly to administrative overhead being the reason for tuition going up. The money wasn't going into the classroom, it wasn't going into teachers, it was going into administrative overhead. So when we were in charge, I brought this study to the committee, and they started to do something. They pretended at least to start doing something about that. But the fact is, at that time, the retiring, we got a new guy now, Kaler, in there, but the retiring president of the University of Minnesota, as he retired, because he's a tenured professor besides being the president, had worked out a deal with the board, which, by the way, they're a land grant, so they don't come to us for a whole lot of money as the university. But he had worked out a deal that he was coming back on as a non-teaching faculty member with 3 of the staff, and the total bill to the state of Minnesota was going to be $500,000 a year. I think his salary was going to go down to like $350,000, and their additional salaries. So this is a old boys club. It seriously is. And unless something changes, it may even take something constitutionally, it's not going to. One of the other things I think is pretty important to know is Minnesota is one of those state universities that doesn't require to be a big differential between those who pay out-of-state and in-state tuition. So the out-of-state people, when they come in, they're not paying appreciably more. Everybody else, if you've sent a kid to college, you know if you're sending your kid out-of-state, well, that's another reason why our tuition for our in-state kids are so expensive, because we don't keep them. They keep saying they want the brightest and the best. Higher education is a cash cow in the state. I know they do a lot of great, good things. RCTC, I know the folks here. They needed that $1 million in order to do some reconstruction and demolition and the like on some things. But the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU system as a whole needs a lot of oversight. That whole idea of administrative overhead is not going away. I know that Senator Nelson and I authored a bill. I authored a bill, and it got signed into law. Is actually one of those things that Dayton signed the first time that uses data analysis. I'm not going to go into the detail, but it basically said you need to look at your administrative overhead, and it gave them the contract, the way that they could hire a consultant to come in to do that. Well, MnSCU did it, and they showed how they were going to save $100 million over 4 years. University of Minnesota give us lip service, and I haven't seen it. In fact, didn't we all get an email from President Taylor in the last couple of days saying how there's a new study out about how they're just wasting money like crazy? I'll let you do it.
The Bell Museum, tens of millions of dollars, and it sounded like a nice thing, but one of the deals was that U of N would go ahead and cover the Bell Museum cost, and they threw more money over to the U of M. And that was a dealing with something that was going to be in the bonding bill. So this past 2 years, there's a lot of dealing. They are constitutionally separated, and the only purse strings is we can not give them money. But yeah, it's disgusting the deals and what's happening. So that's the bonding tie-in. They help the Dems hide stuff.
Just a little bit more to your question. The bonding bill, for the Bell Museum was a $54 million request. Interestingly enough, the U of M did not want that, but the House member who was the chair of the bonding committee was insistent, and so I think they ended up getting it in some, one could say creative way, I don't know if you'd call it creative, but a different way. But I will say when it comes to, it's always good for folks to know, the bonding bill is for those assets, those bricks and mortar type things, but the appropriations to the higher education institutions take place in the budget year. So that is the odd number years. So when we go back into session in 2015, we will be once again setting the state's 2-year budget. The largest part of that budget is K-12 education, and then usually higher ed is about 11% of the budget. I will tell you, last year when we passed the higher education budget bill, I offered an amendment which would rectify this fact that Representative Benson mentioned, which is at the University of Minnesota, are outstate students, people who come here but don't live here. In other words, their parents aren't Minnesota taxpayers. They have a lower tuition rate when it comes to rankings in the Big Ten. Our outstate tuition rate is one of the lowest in the nations for the U of M. But on the other hand, our in-state tuition rate, that's for our kids of Minnesota taxpayers, we have one of the highest tuition rates in the nation. And that statistic, that trend needs to be turned on its head. I offered that amendment on the Senate floor. Of course, it did not pass, but I did get a promise that the U would be rectifying that inequity, I think is what I would call it. Now, I will be watching this next budget year to see if that truly has taken place.
Okay. Time for just a few more questions.
I've got a little different question to set you thinking. You have done a pretty good job of telling us how bad the legislature is and the governor in the state of Minnesota. Now we find that happens all over, and we have the federal government doing exactly the same thing. I get the feeling that the state legislature is trying to follow along with what's happening in the federal government. So my question is, how long will this go on before the people in the United States, and especially in Minnesota, rise up and take matters into their own hands without the legislature or the governor?
I will tell you, I read a great article this morning, and if you email me tonight, I will send it out to you. But it talked about in Western Europe, of course, they are the social democracy that is, 20 years ahead of us. And how it's amazing that, of course, it's unsustainable. What we're seeing is unsustainable government growth, both at the federal and at the state level. And what's amazing about the elections that are transpiring right now in Western Europe is that those social democracies are being overturned because the people have woken up and they're not voting for those politicians who are saying we want more entitlements, we want more government programs, and that's a real turnaround for those Western European countries. And we know that that's really the beauty of our system, quite frankly, our democracy, is that the power does rest in the people. And I think about how bad it is, and I think about one of my favorite quotes about democracies, and that is, democracies are the worst form of government there ever was. And then the rest of the quote is, except for everything else that has been tried. And I do believe that's true. And then right along with that, this is a Winston Churchill quote, and I think the next quote really ties into your question, Glenn, and that is, democracies get the kind of government they deserve. And that's a hard thing for us to take. But democracies do get the kind of government they deserve because the power does rest in the people. Although we're telling you the game is a little bit skewed right now, and so that makes it a little tough.
Not soon enough.
I think they already are doing it. Rainbow Foods has announced that they're pulling out of the state. Now, some of their stores are going to be bought by other companies, but they're leaving the state. Some of that was because of the minimum wage bill that was passed. Panera Foods decided that they're going to begin a transition to when you go to order food, they're going to eliminate the people at the cash register. You're going to do it on an iPad. So people are going to find workarounds, and they're leaving the state. When I ran for Congress, up until about a month and a half ago, I spent a lot of time talking to businessmen and women, and for the purpose, of course, of trying to raise funds for a campaign. But to the T, most of them were saying, we love Minnesota. We're lifelong residents. We've earned our money here, and so on and so forth, and raised our families, but we're leaving. And if they already haven't done it, so they've left some operations here, they've taken their personal wealth, and they've already committed to moving to places like Florida with zero state income tax. So they're already doing it. And unlike many other countries within the United States, you have other economies, if you will, in other states that are more business friendly, they're more tax friendly, they're more retirement friendly, and people are moving. That's the thing about wealth. It can move wherever it needs to move.
And I'll be brief. Just understand where we live, and it's Minnesota, and we all love it. But the reality is, in the 42 years or so that we have had partisan elections in Minnesota, there has not been 1 year where we have had a Republican governor and a Republican House and Senate chamber. Never in those years. The best we ever did was 2010 through 12, where we had the Republican House and Senate. We had to buck the governor, but that's the best we've ever done. And is this sustainable? I don't think so. You can't go down this road much longer. Mike has said it, and I did that too. I raised money for our caucus for 5 years to win elections. They would repeatedly say, as he said, the rich and famous of the Twin City area. We're not maybe going to leave here because we got roots, My wife won't let me leave, all that. But for goodness sakes, we're not going to grow here. We're just not going to grow here. We can't afford to grow here, especially if you're a stock company. You can't afford it. The stockholders won't let you. And so that's a sad thing. I tell you, when I first heard that just pulled at my heart. We got people, leaders in Minnesota, saying we can't grow our business here. That's a dangerous path. We got to change it.
All right, I think we've reached the end of the question session here. I'd like to have a nice round of applause for all of these folks. As I said earlier, we're going to wrap up our meeting now. Please stand to chat. On your way out, we have a donation box. You could help us to pay for the room. That would be great. Carla said she's got one more thing.
Thank you.
Well, two things. It's going to be a great year for Republicans if you all get involved. So I hope every one of you signs up to work for one of our candidates. I want to just offer the greatest thanks to my House member, the one that I dearly love, Representative Benson. He has represented the House district very well, and we're going to miss him.